Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I'm standing in for Miss Laura Kelly, who's the chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party, DEC. And today we're going to explore the significance of Juneteenth, the legacy of Black Miami, with Dr. Marvin Dunn, educator, historian, author, and lifelong advocate for truth and justice. We'll be discussing Miami's Black community and the history of Juneteenth and how it's affected our past, our present, and our future, and how it ties into none other than the Civil Rights Act of 1865. I'm your host, Bernard WH Jennings. I'm the president and CEO of the Biscayne Gardens Chamber of Commerce. I wear a number of hats in the community. I'm also on the board of trustees of Florida Memorial University, South Florida's only historical Black college and university. I also sit on the board of the organization called the Foundation for Youth and Economic Development, which is a nonprofit arm for the teen courts of Miami, which is part of the Miami-Dade Advocacy Trust. Dr. Dunn, I'm so happy to have you here. We're going to talk today about how Juneteenth is looked upon in the present day and its effect on Miami, the fact that it stands for resilience, it stands for resistance, and the ongoing pursuit of equality in the community, and everything that goes with that, and how it ties into the Civil Rights Act of 1865. How you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself, though.
Well, I was born in 1940. I will be 85 years old this month. I grew up in Miami. My family came here in 1951. I graduated from Morehouse College. I served 7 years as a naval officer. Finished my graduate work in psychology at the University of Tennessee. Came back home to Miami and eventually, ultimately joined FIU as a psychology professor. Taught there for 36 years, retired, and now I write and make trouble.
like John Lewis said, good trouble.
Good trouble.
And I've, as a young man growing up, when I came to the realization of civil rights, I remember as a young man, I remember the Neville Johnson Jr. Incident in Miami, and the creation of the Martin Luther King Center and things of that sort. And I've seen you on TV a lot of times talking about these different issues that affect the community. Mm-hmm. Over the years, have you seen a change in what has gone on, and what does Juneteenth really represent?
Well, let's start with that last question. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it represents. I'm not a fan of Juneteenth.
Well, I know that in Texas, in 1865, the Texas Army declared that the 250,000 Blacks would be freed due to the Civil Rights Act of 1865. Yeah, right. And I think we've moved forward in time where someone coined this as a holiday, and we're celebrating it not just as a holiday, but as, hopefully it means more to us now. But I think there's a disconnect between the community and what the word means and what we should be doing in regards to the fact that it's the word, Juneteenth.
Well, my problem with Juneteenth is that it didn't change anything for the enslaved people. If you were a slave the day before Juneteenth, the day after Juneteenth, you were still a slave. Economic slave, anyway. I don't know what changed for the average Black person when Juneteenth happened. We were still economically enslaved. You were still physically challenged in terms of your capacity to survive. I don't know what changed. I think we needed something to celebrate in these more recent years, but Black folks went right back to the cotton fields after Juneteenth, right back to the cotton fields after the 1865 Act. We were still economically enslaved, which meant, what differences did it make? That the white man said, okay, you're now free. What was the guy, what was a former slave going to do when Juneteenth happened and you're now free? Go to Ohio, go to Canada. People stayed right where they were. It didn't change much of anything. So I think we're over celebrating something that didn't really make very much difference in the lives of the enslaved people.
Maybe it's for hope of what it should have meant. In my limited understanding of the history, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, the Attorney General at the time didn't even give the information to other states. And then when it was challenged in court later on, it was upheld that the Civil Rights Act meant that the public, the government, couldn't discriminate, but an individual that was private could still discriminate. And it, brought freedom to people other than white,
It just
but
stopped
not a full
government
scope,
from discriminating.
not fully.
Not at all.
Mhm.
What limitations were there on the government to discriminate, to not discriminate after that act was passed? When we know that governmental discrimination continued up even to today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what I guess I look for what difference these acts made in the lives of the people who were alive at that time, and I'm having trouble trying to see any impact of significance on Black people when these acts were passed.
But as we move forward in time, there are significant incidents that have happened in South Florida.
Yes.
And mainly three. There's the Neville Johnson Jr. incident. Prior to that, let's discuss those three.
Well, Neville Johnson was a Black man who was shot and killed in Overtown, and a riot resulted from that. He was. I think he was in a video game establishment, and I think he was the one who was shot.
He was shot.
Yeah, a Hispanic police officer comes up to Neville. He thinks that Neville has a gun. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was armed. And the officer put his gun to Neville's head and said, "Don't move." And the boy turned his head, and the man blew his brains out. Mm-hmm. And that precipitated a riot in Overtown that we still have memories of, because that was such a tragic killing. We found out later that the trigger on that gun had been altered, so it was a hair trigger. And Neville Johnson was killed by a police officer using an illegal gun. Mm. And it was just a very, very tragic incident. Before that was the McDuffie riot, which really changed Miami in a very significant way. If you want to speak about that a little bit, we can focus on that. But that was Miami's most historic event in terms of its Black history.
And I remember during that time, a lot of the riots and the looting and stuff took place in areas that were predominantly Black.
Yeah,
which didn't make sense to me. If we're going to riot, if anyone's going to riot, I would say don't do it in your own neighborhood.
The police, when this happened in 1980, mm-hmm. May 17th, 1980, mm-hmm. when the community exploded over the fact that these white officers who had beaten this Black man to death were exonerated, the police set up a barricade at 7th Avenue mm-hmm. and at 27th Avenue. Mm-hmm. And the orders were, if the rioters left those areas, there were orders that they would be shot. So people knew not to go east of 7th Avenue. So the boundary was pretty well set by the police.
So they showed off where they could show off.
But in their own community. Exactly. See, plus another part of that was that Black people owned very few of those businesses that were burned. They saw a lot of the business folks in the community as being outsiders who were, gouging the community. So there was anger that had built up over generations of some of the merchants in the community. Mm-hmm. But all of that doesn't excuse what happened. But if you get to deeper issues, you still had economic deterioration and stagnation among the Black folks that added to the atmosphere of desperation at that time.
Mm-hmm. And what's the third incident in Miami was prior to that? Neville Johnson Jr., those riots. Let me ask you a question though. As we move forward in time, right, the culture of Black Miami is different than it was in the 80s.
Absolutely.
Different than it was in the 70s or 60s. How do you see the transition and difference now than it was when you were a younger man growing up?
When I was growing up in Miami in the 1950s, you had African Americans here, mm-hmm. and you had Bahamians here. Mm-hmm. The Bahamians were in Coconut Grove for the most part. African Americans were settling in Overtown after 1896 when the city was founded. So these two ethnic groups of Black people were in Miami actually from the very beginning. And they didn't get along. Even in the early years, the two groups had conflicting incidents back and forth over a number of issues. Then the next major change for the Black community was the arrival of the Haitians in the 1970s, which was not a pleasant event for the community, for the Haitians. I think our Black community members did not do enough to assist them as they came. But now we had 3 Black ethnic groups in Miami, actually 4, because we now have Black Cubans as well. Mm-hmm. And now you have a very varied mix of Black people living mainly in the same general area, with competition for jobs, for schools, for hospitals, for whatever, and tensions grew and are still growing around those kinds of things. One example is that before the Haitians came in, there had never been in the Black community a school on double shift. The Haitians came into that area, and the Dade County school system had to put some of the schools on double shift.
The night school, the night program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not just that, but no, the school day was cut in half.
Cut in half.
Yeah. So there were these kinds of issues that rubbed different ethnic groups. Black ethnic groups were all jammed in the same geographic area, and we still are for the most part, even though the community has expanded to the north very extensively. But there was never a level playing field for Black folks here of whatever ethnic group you came from. I did a study, one of the first studies I did when I got to FIU in 1972. I wanted to know which of the Black ethnic groups were doing best in terms of education, income, and what have you. So I did this study, took a year and a half, and guess who came out on top in terms of education and earnings in Miami-Dade County?
Who?
Jamaicans.
Well, I'm Jamaican descent, so I can agree with that.
Jamaicans came out on top. And then
both my parents are Jamaican.
And then they'll tell you so. Jamaicans came out on top because they have, I guess, in their culture, a higher value for education and for business ventures and what have you. Haitians came out on the bottom, of course, but African Americans were middling.
What year was that?
That study was finished in 1974.
I think there's a shift now because I realized that cross-culturally, Jamaicans and even Haitians are very ambitious people. They're very hardworking. Specifically Haitians in their culture, they drive for their children and their grandchildren to get an education and move further ahead. In the Jamaican culture, for not 100% of everybody, but the majority of my family members there's a drive. There's an expectation you're going to go to college. You're going to do something. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to be some professional.
Yeah, those are the kinds of cultural differences that absolutely make a difference. And you're right about those things being emphasized more in one community than another, than in another. Certainly, I think within the African American community, I wouldn't make any distinction in terms of parental commitment to helping their children. But I think if you are a parent who was a high school dropout, your parents were high school dropouts, there was no encouragement, structure, support for you to go to college, then your expectations of yourself and of your children become diminished compared to someone who comes in with a much different cultural background.
Well, I think the issue with that is that we tend to gravitate as human beings to what we're exposed to. If you expose a child to a limitation of what he or she can be in the future, then that's where they'll see themselves. They're going to see themselves in that box. So if you're talking about whether it's the African American Black community, I'm going to use the word Black community versus Bahamian versus Haitian, the different times they had exposure. If you're doing your studies, there's exposure to what they had at that time that told you what their ambition would be. But now if you look back 30, 40 years, you have prominent doctors. Dr. Moise, a Haitian doctor in Miami. You've got other prominent professionals, the outgoing, the president of the Bar Association is a Haitian. You actually have the Haitian Bar Association. You have the Jamaican professionals that are in different places. It's a different time now than it was back then. So they've been exposed differently. So they're moving differently in the community. And then we have this instant iced tea of what the community represents, that everybody wants everything now. You put the powder in and mix it up. You got air fryers, not the stove. I don't know how to cook on a stove anymore. I got an air fryer. So I know this is true. And then, with the expectation that everything is now, people want to see progress faster. So there's this disconnect between what I have and what it took to get here.
People deserve to see progress faster, especially now that we're going backwards. So I'm encouraged to see people dissatisfied with the present circumstances that we live in. We were talking earlier about the party, the Democratic Party, and
the Democratic Party.
If we maybe speak about
that. Yeah, Democratic Republican Party. Yes, we
I'm
can.
a Democrat. My whole life, I've never voted for anything but Democrats. Probably never will. But I'm very concerned about where we are. We're talking about these ethnic groups struggling, trying to uplift themselves in a time when we're being pushed back, pushed down, put down.
Explain to me how you define push down. How How is the ethnic group being pushed down for the audience, so that we know what we're talking
Sure.
about, the same premise?
Sure. When you have a rule that you can't work on this job unless you have a union card, you can't be a part of this building project unless you have a union card. Well, that's pushing down a lot of black men who don't have union cards.
What does it take to get a union card?
I'm sorry?
What does it take to get
The union has to approve it. As you apply, you get approved by the union process. It's a human decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you asked that question, because of all the things that I can point to post-slavery
Mm-hmm.
that has kept black people back has been the fact that labor unions in our country would not allow black men to join them until the 1940s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So when Miami was being built, when Florida was being built, black men could only push wheelbarrows. You couldn't be a carpenter, could not be a plumber, you had to push the wheelbarrow.
There's certain things you could do.
Now think about how that translates going forward generationally. A white man could get a job as a plumber and work 30, 40 years and provide for his family, and a black man is pushing the dirt in a wheelbarrow. What could he provide for his family in the final
So
analysis?
he had a limited thought process of how far up he'd go. But over the last 20, 30 years, that's different. Anybody can decide they want to be a plumber or an electrician and do what it takes. They may not have the resources to move immediately to do that, but we have the freedom now to go embrace any career path we want, whether professional or labor, right now. With nothing stopping us.
You don't think race is an issue when people go to get a job in certain areas, certain professions?
I think race is an issue. However, I don't believe that that race is always an issue.
I didn't say it was always an issue.
There's systematic racism.
Here is how it is an issue in Miami-Dade County,
Mm-hmm.
particularly given the fact that we are a tourist economy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of businesses that serve tourists will not have a black face up front. They don't want a black person at the desk when people come in. They'd rather have a Hispanic or white person there. What does that do? And that's a real factor. We've been complaining about that for generations. Why can't we be at the front desk? Why do we have to be the ones back in the back cleaning the rooms in the kitchen? The tourist industry has been extremely discriminatory against blacks, and they still are. When Hispanics came in, the few jobs that blacks were allowed to have on Miami Beach, Hispanics got them. So it's historically apparent fact to me. One other fact about this: when the Mariels came in 1981, and this real sweep of Cubans who were not that well off themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing an ad in a Cuban newspaper. They were trying to get someone to be a custodian.
Mm-hmm.
And in it said, no blacks, no black Cubans.
In the paper.
Yeah.
Well,
So I'm just saying, people get pushed down in a lot of ways still, even today.
we get pushed down. However, there's this tabula rasa now where we can move to do what we want to do. It's not always racism why we don't get where we want to go. It's a lack of initiative sometimes.
You think if a black man wanted to be governor of Florida, he could just be a governor of Florida with no racial problem?
we almost had a black
I know,
governor of Florida.
I voted for Gil.
We almost had a black governor of Florida. To make a move like that, you have to be positioned in certain places and have certain connections that lend to each other in certain communities that blend back to make you become a candidate for governor. It's a very big, ambitious thing. Any black man is free to run for governor. That doesn't mean
I'm just asking you, do you think race is an issue for a black person running for governor today?
Sure, it's an issue.
Yeah, that's my point.
I think it's an issue, but I don't believe that's the issue that's going to ultimately stop him from running, stop him from winning the election. It becomes political, it becomes economic to have the resources to run. Andrew Gillum mounted a very good campaign at the time. To go back in history, he only lost by 30,000 votes. So he had funds and he had people in place, but there's certain things at the end of the campaign that campaign did not do to take him over the line.
Things that he did not do. He defeated himself. I was out there waving for this man. I'm telling you,
it wasn't him. It was some people in his campaign that did the right thing, particularly some of his
it was a very
manager position. They changed the scope of what was going on as far as the technology communication to do text messaging. There's recordings of different popular individuals who could have assisted in getting those last 500,000 people to vote that never went out because they changed the numbers at the end, and somebody benefited from that change, and Andrew Gillum paid the price of losing the election. I was personally involved. So I know that to be a fact. And he would have been the governor rather than DeSantis. So,
Well,
but
I differ on that.
But beyond that, though, let's take it back to the fact, because different communities right now, Miramar, Miami Gardens, North Miami Beach, they're celebrating Juneteenth coming up.
Mm-hmm.
My birthday's on June 21st, so
Right.
I'm getting overshadowed. My birthday's not as popular because of Juneteenth, which is okay with me. But it's a celebration for the fact that we have an ability to have rights. But do you feel that blacks, whether they're Caribbean, Bahamian, Haitian, are taking full advantages of the opportunities that are here for us? Or do you feel that for some of us, we have a fear, false evidence appearing real, of what we can take advantage of?
No, I think there's a certain amount of truth in the assertion that a lot of things are available to us that we're not taking advantage of, particularly young people who are dispirited, discouraged, angry.
We're not working together. Disconnect.
So I think there's an argument that could be made for that. I also think that there are still actually issues that have come over generations going back to slavery. Mainly getting back to our earlier point about attitudes, culture, what you were taught, what you were exposed to as you come along. It doesn't surprise me that young
and believing that you can do more than what you're doing, because a lot of times we don't move to do what we want to do or what we think we want to do because we have a fear that if we do it, it's not going to work. And then you have to have some exposure to someone or have the grit inside of you to change, to make the change or to move forward. And a lot of times people suffer from the lack of believing. What Harriet Tubman said, there would have been more blacks that were free if they would believe they could have been free, but they stayed behind, right?
Well, one of the things that has impressed me about the impact of people who don't go forward, get into trouble, etc., has been the absence of fathers among black families. Why is that? I asked that question rhetorically, intending to answer it. When you look at the black family today, why is it that we have such a high number of families that do not have males present to assist women in raising their children? Some of them are lazy guys. Some of them are take advantage of the welfare system, so there's that going on. But what about the fact that so many of them are in prison? And what about the fact that so many of these men are in prison and therefore not available to help support their families, as many of them would? Because of racial policies in courts, where you have more black men going to prison for the same sort of, for much more time, for the same thing.
They've been given a higher sentence for the crime they were committed.
But this is important because it takes the male. See, I think there's the assumption that he's a criminal, he's not supporting his family, but therefore, what difference does it make if he's in jail or not? I'm telling you, for the last 15 years, I've worked with some of the most dangerous men in Florida on death row. My clients, 35 or 40 men over the last 15 years, have been my clients. I've sat in jail cells with them, trying to find out, you killed 5 people in one night. What was
going through your head?
Yeah, exactly. And
you're not going through your head.
Exactly. And as I've done this work, what I've found is that the most consistent response I get now is not that the daddy's not there, which is common, but now the mom's not there. Kids getting raised with the moms on the pipe, moms in the street, so no one's watching, no one's raising some of these boys, and they don't learn any rules or boundaries, and you end up with people doing very, very, very horrible things.
Well, when you talk about absent fathers, I was instrumental in initiating a proposal to the state legislature through Christopher Benjamin, a state representative who's now a judge, called Ethan's Good Dad Act. It's House Bill 775, Parental Responsibility After the Determination of Paternity. Prior to the legislation, which passed July 1 of 2023, it said that when a mother and a father have a child unmarried, the mother is the natural born guardian of the child. The law did not mention the father at all. So when a father stepped up to be a part of his child's life, whether he was in the birth certificate or not, he didn't have any rights in court. The child was the mother's property, just like her cell phone is. So when a father would go to court to get time with the child, and he's got false allegations from the mother or true allegations from the mother, he's got a long way to go. You have many fathers, not only black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever denomination, trying to seek time with their child. And because of a personal dysfunctional relationship with the mother, they've been stymied from being able to father their child appropriately, which lends to all those issues that you talked about across the board. But particularly now that the law has changed in Florida, it's called Ethan's Good Dad Act. You can Google it, or the website's gooddadact.com for the audience
And
that's
what
watching.
was your role in that
My
again?
roles is that I was in a relationship with someone, and they decided one day they didn't want to co-parent with me anymore because they realized I was marrying somebody else. So they removed my child from school. I couldn't find my son for a month. So I petitioned the court, and I found a Florida statute that allowed me to get time in court. And I got time in court, and the judge declared at the time that, you don't have any rights. You're on a birth certificate. You turn in a DNA test that says you're 99.99991 the father, but you don't have any rights. So at that point, the judge said, well, to get rights, you have to establish paternity, which is the courts making you the father legally. And that means you have a financial responsibility. It doesn't mean you get visitation. So after about 6 months to a year of a trial, then you can come back and petition the court by serving the mother again and ask for visitation. The problem is that the mother moved. I didn't know where she was. She moved to another county without my permission or without my knowing. Couldn't find her. So moving fast forward, I said, the judge, Your Honor, can you give an order for them to let me know where they live so that I can have time with my child? His name is Ethan. And the judge said, no, I can't do that. You have to serve them. You have to get an attorney or get a private investigator and find them yourselves. I said, well, they're here now on this Zoom call. Can you ask them to do it? I asked the attorney for the mother. She said, no, she wasn't going to accept service. I asked my son's mother. The attorney interjected, said, no, I'm not going to allow her to answer that question. I haven't had a chance to confer that with her. And the law doesn't say she has to answer that question. I said, Your Honor, can you give me an order? I said, no, Mr. Jennings, I'd love to help you, but I can't. That's not what the law says. Have a good day, and ended the Zoom call. So I wrote a petition, proposed to the state legislature, and asked them to change the law based upon the criteria that I knew this happened to me. And it happened to other dads that I knew about too, but I didn't do anything about it because it didn't hit home. And that's usually what happens with folks. Until it hits home, you start doing stuff about it, right? So we wrote this proposal. It went through committees on the House side. A Republican on the Senate side brought it to the Senate side, Yarborough. Benjamin on the House side. 8 months later, it passed the House and the Senate unanimously. The governor signed into law three weeks early, July 1, 2023. It's called Ethan's Good Dad Act. Gives fathers equal rights to their children, so they can participate in the health, in the education, in recreation, everything that you could do as a married couple. And there's a rebuttable presumption from the mother that she has to prove why you're not a good dad. Right. So now fathers can step up to take responsibility because they walk into court with the same presumption as equality with the mother. But we still have an issue with the false allegation of domestic violence that cause men to be stymied because that's a different court. Right. So if you're in domestic violence in one court and you got an allegation that has no merit, and then you're in family court trying to get time, the judges are telling the mother, go file domestic violence charges against him. That way, when you go to court, family court, he's messed up. He's not going to be able to have time. Well, and it's in the gumption to make him have to pay and not parent the kid because the mother is bitter. Now that's not okay. So back to what you're saying, I realize I hold a meeting with groups of men. 101 meetings we've had so far at 8:00 every Tuesday evening. Men all around the country. We've moved to change this law in Missouri, in New Jersey, in Alabama. It just passed in Tennessee and North Carolina. It goes to effect July 1 of this year. But these fathers have the same story, that they've been stymied from being able to see their children. It goes to your point that a home that doesn't have those prisoners you've talked to, I'm sure statistically that 81% of those male prisoners, whether they're black, white, or whatever race they are, came from a home without a father. 61% of men of homes without a father, those children have a greater chance of dropping out of school, getting into kind of dysfunctional trouble, becoming teenage pregnancy. So I think when you go back to what the party should do, I think the party should embrace fathers' rights on a national level.
The Democratic Party?
Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party has been such a disappointment to me lately, because I don't know what we stand for. We had this conversation off camera, and I've been a lifelong Democrat. What I see now is kind of trying to stay in the middle, a milquetoast, don't rock the boat too much. And I just don't know what's going to happen in the next election cycle if we don't become known to stand for something other than against Donald Trump.
Against something, right? But I think there's a disconnect between the history of what the Democratic Party has done to help the greater community versus what am I getting out of it now, that iced tea thing. Because when we talk about programs and things that help families, whether it's healthy food for children, whether it's Section 8 families that need that type of help. Those things are programs are pushed by Democrats, not by Republican Party, and now is this move to get rid of them because they're saying, oh, well, that's keeping people down because if you make too much money and you're in Section 8, and then you're not going to get the assistance. So the key is to don't dumb yourself down so you can continue to get the benefit. Some people may take advantage of that, some people don't. But these things, the fact that we want to protect Social Security is a Democratic issue of wanting to do that. Republicans want to privatize it, the fear of what happens if you privatize it.
If there's a disconnect, isn't it the Democrats' fault? Isn't it the party's fault? If people aren't getting it, people don't know what we're standing for. Whose fault is that?
Well, it's a disconnect from the lack of memory. So the party should take responsibility for that and should have a better messaging that let people know. But people, it's our responsibility too. It's not just the party. If you're part of something and you're not actively trying to see how it benefits you. I remember this lady by the name of Irma Williams. She was a professor and a dean at Florida Moore University when I first entered as a freshman. She said, find an organization, learn how the organization works, and make the organization work for you. So if we're sitting back as citizens, just sitting back and letting things happen and thinking it's all going to be good, whose fault is that?
But maybe people wouldn't be sitting back because they thought our party stood for something they could identify with.
No? Well,
I'll put it out there. I think the Democratic Party should stand for universal health care.
I believe you.
I think the American people would elect us to every level of government if we stood for that. But instead, I hear us being afraid of being called socialist or communist. You can't go for universal health care. As long as we try to walk that middle road, and not let the American people see that we really do stand for something other than against Trump, we're gonna still get beaten.
Yeah, and I think it's and the party has an identity, but the party has an identity based upon the people. So the people have to rise up. Power doesn't give up by itself. You have to take power, right? So if the people don't get together, everyone that has this complaint like you have and don't participate a part of the process and inject yourself, because the Democratic Party is a name. The people control the party. So if you have the people that believe what you believe and say what you want, and there are 100 people from your neighborhood and you join your local party, then the votes change. You get to make a motion, it gets to be seconded, and when it gets to vote, if you got the numbers, you win, and it moves up the ladder the same way. But this is a great conversation I've had with you, and I'm afraid we're running out of time. But I want to thank you for coming a part of this podcast, and let's do this again, because we can do part B, not necessarily on Juneteenth, but on how do we move the community forward, because I think the lack of us working together, they say something happens to one person in the community and it's not your issue, so what? Happens to another person in the community is not your issue, I'm too busy doing something else. At some point, the issue is going to come to you, and if you haven't helped anybody with their issue, who's going to be there to help you with your issue?
Good question.
Nobody. So we need to embrace these issues that everybody have and understand that we're all in this big melting pot. We're in a big body of water in a bunch of little dinghies, and every one of us are springing leaks.
Everything in the melting pot didn't melt.
Sometimes
they got some lumps on the bottom that haven't quite melted.
Some things floated and some things just ashed up and floated away. But we all have to eat, right? Yep. So we have to work together to make it happen. Otherwise, we're going to suffer from, let's say, a lack of knowing the history and knowing where you've been. You're going to suffer in the future, right?
Amen.
I believe you know that too, to be true. All right. Thank you, Dr. Marvin Dunn. Any last words?
Stay safe out there, everybody. These are dangerous times.
These are dangerous times. Be careful. Hug your children. Love your friends and love your neighbors and love yourself, and stay healthy. Drink a lot of water. My name is Dr. Bernard Jennings. You can reach me at the Good Dad Act, www.gooddadact.com, or get the book, ethansgooddadact.com. And I want to thank the Miami-Dade Democratic Party for allowing us to use this time to talk together. And everyone, be safe.